Hi there, it's Mary Charlson here from 5minutemarketing.com. And this week we're taking a look at 13 consumer trends that we're going to want to be monitoring post-pandemic. These are going to, some of them have long-term impacts, some of them are, kind of shorter term, but definitely these will impact the ways that we take a look at not only threats, but also opportunities. So the first one is our workplaces are shifting to home. And this has resulted in less things around transit use, less demands on wardrobe and clothing purchases, less breakfasts out, lunches out in downtown hubs. But it's also caused an increased demand on internet speeds in our homes. And not only the download speed is important for entertainment, but also the upload speed for meetings and video conferencing, sort of like this. Also, so it's going to have impacts on long-term around office rentals and spaces needed, but also home design. And so those are some things we're going to want to monitor going forward. And we suspect that this, not everybody's going to want to work out of the home, but many will. And employers have discovered that the productivity has actually gone up rather than down during this time period. The second big trend is online shopping has increased. This, again, was something that we already it was underway, but the pandemic seems to have really amplified that. And the whole contactless shopping and payment has certainly, been behind that, but also just the availability of options and being able to get it quickly. And those kind of online shopping gains are unlikely to go away post-pandemic. There's also been an increase in online media use. Doesn't come as a big surprise. We're sitting at home and working and entertainment, but we've gone from spending on average 3 hours a day to over 10 hours a day tuned to media, whether that be defined by work or entertainment use. And what's happened during that time period is, because we're spending so much time on media and devices, the actual opportunity for advertising and promoting on social media, as an example, has actually gone up. And curiously, during that time period, a lot of companies have actually retracted on their marketing budgets, just simply because they're kind of afraid, kind of recessionary kind of times potentially coming on. So there's actually marketing opportunity there, because when the demand goes down, the pricing goes down, but people are spending more time. So that's a trend that we definitely want to take advantage of. There's fourth trend is the focus on self-improvement. And then, whether it's an increase, in, sort of discovering, what really matters to you, or being able to, devote more time to goals, self-improvement around physical, mental. But we do know that, things around home fitness, yoga, sales have gone up 154%, excuse me. And we've also seen an increase in volume in terms of online courses, self-help books. And so this whole focus around self-improvement is, will that continue? Who knows? But definitely something that we're seeing here during the pandemic, I should say. The fifth trend is a do-it-yourself culture, the DIY culture. And it's that whole kind of, the baking bread, home-cooked meals, planting gardens, growing our own food. Some of it is do-it-yourself home improvement projects. Some people have found themselves, taking money that they would have spent on travel and turning their home into something that they enjoy more, outdoor patios, things like that, gardens. So that whole do-it-yourself culture is on the rise. Will that stay post-pandemic? I suspect pieces of it will. And so again, that's impacted, some industries that, like home improvement, Rona and all those kind of stores have actually seen increases in that area. We've also seen a hyper-localized focus. Now that's not only on our travel options, but it's also on things around, favoring country solutions, employing our own. And part of that, again, was driven initially by kind of medical supplies, but then now it's also we're seeing supply chains that were threatened, and realizing the benefits of having control of our own supply chains. And so that, and again, it was kind of that kind of nationalism was already kind of underway. not only the United States, but also in areas of Europe. And so this whole kind of hypersensitivity to localized, I think it was a bigger trend, and then the pandemic has just amplified it. So what will we see going forward? Likely, consumers really valuing where something was produced, where it was made. Was it from the, did it employ people in their own home country? That's going to be of value to them. And so just being just very much aware of that. Interactions have gone virtual. That's the 7th trend. And so, no big surprise, with the pandemic, we've done a whole lot more Zoom calls, messaging, using technology, Microsoft Teams, and for work, but also for social. And those interactions, to a certain extent, will continue. I think it will facilitate much more business meetings in the future, perhaps a call to question business travel. It's new ways to unite people. It's never going to replace face-to-face and human interaction, but the knowledge that we can be brought closer together through virtual means, I think, will stay on post-pandemic. The 8th trend is that people are looking to economize, and this is sometimes it's due to job loss, down, fewer hours, being in an industry that was really impacted, like travel, or frontline workers on like restaurants and the hospitality industry. But it's also psychological. You could be fully employed, but aware that, a recession could be coming. And so you're economizing, you're making more, choices around being thrifty. And so we're seeing that, especially if there is a prolonged recovery, kind of a flat recovery, that definitely will kick in. I believe it was the 60% of people have reported cut back in spending, and I think that was an Ernst and Young study. And so, and they've definitely changed where they're spending their money. And that has impacted it as well. There's only so many groceries and stops to the liquor store that people can make, and so they've cut back a lot of other things that they traditionally spent their money on. The 9th trend is, purpose and social good now matter more than ever. This has always been important. It's been elevating in importance over the last, number of years, and the pandemic seems to really kind of magnify that. I don't know whether it's the return to basics, kind of the focus on self-improvement, or to a certain extent, kind of fueled by that do-it-yourself culture, but purpose and values seem to matter even more. People have kind of reflected around, what's authentic, what gives meaning, and they want that to align with their own social values. And so an interesting thing, I think it was the Ernst and Young study again, that said 33% of respondents said that they would reappraise the things that they value and not take them for granted going forward. So the 10th trend that we're monitoring is changing attitudes to privacy. I find this one really fascinating. I was doing some earlier research for an article around contact tracing and how that could play into the travel industry recovery. And so we were looking at an awful lot at how people value, the tracking of their personal data and their privacy. And interesting study, and again, it's US based, but indicates that 50% of Americans were willing to share their location and their health data, but as much as 80% of them questioned how that would be used going forward after the pandemic. And actually those numbers were a little bit, about a month ago or so. And so there seems to be, again, hypersensitivity rising around this thing around privacy. And so for businesses, I think what's going to be important is to be very much aware of that and using consumer data in a very, considerate and thoughtful way, and not, overtly targeting, unless they have agreed to certain things. Just being very much aware of, the data that you're collecting and how you're using it to target them as consumers, because they will be very much aware if they receive something which, they hadn't really agreed to. The 11th trend is human connection and storytelling is on the rise. You know, a good story will never go out of fashion. But the pandemic seems to have shined a light on our craving for human connection through stories. And so, you know, and whether that's because we've been denied that physical connection, but, you know, we're wanting to see the backstories, the authentic things that are happening behind the scenes. And so brands that are showing up authentically, telling very human stories, maybe it's around their customers, around the people who work there, you know, showing up imperfectly. And that's okay, because then it helps people kind of adapt, you know, kind of it resonates with them as consumers. But telling the stories, weaving in, you know, letting us get the backstory on what's happening. Interesting stats here in March 2020 alone, over 40% of Instagram users and 34% of Facebook users watched people's stories. And again, part of that is an increase, but also the increased use around social media during this time. And but what we're seeing here with stories, because they're imperfect, they're they go away in 24 hours. There's this shift towards more open communication and authenticity in brand storytelling. And this will be very interesting to be able to use Facebook stories, to be able to use Instagram stories, and coming soon, not in North America, but it's currently in some parts in Europe and in Australia, is stories on LinkedIn. The 12th trend is social distance traveling increases at the expense of air travel. And, you know, RV rentals are up 400% this summer, and car road trips are kind of the thing. And so there's this emphasis on local tourism as a global trend. And well, there's no doubt that there's going to be a return to global trips in the future. I know that Ernst and Young said that there was a 70% plan to spend cautiously in cautiously extravagant ways. I'm not quite sure what that means once it's safe. So there's this pent-up demand, but in the interim, there's definitely there's the domestic travel, which is at the expense of air travel, because a lot of people are just not confident yet in terms of the safety. The 13th one, and this is the one that I think is really interesting, fascinating, maybe a little scary, but I really kind of give it a whole lot of credit, and that is fear may remain long-term. And Martin Lindstrom does quite a bit of research on consumer behavior, well respected, and he wrote Biology, as in B-U-Y, ology, buying, and just basically the whole science around how people purchase and how they consume. So he's done an updated book called Biology for a Coronavirus World. The article that links with this video has links to that, where you can download it as a free PDF. But basically the thesis behind it is that human race, it's been exposed to so much pandemic related fear for so long that it actually might permanently rewire our consumer patterns. And he contends that eventually the virus will fade away, but those emotional impact of the virus may well stay, and infusing it into kind of our subconscious and minds as fear. So whether it be, fear of health issues, fear of safety issues, fear of connection or non-connection issues, livelihood, economic, there's many fears attached here. And he sort of, talks about it and relates to, what happened in the 30s and in the war years with a generation that has kind of changed their patterns. They were thrifty, they didn't leverage, they used coupons, they, the various things that were formative during that time period really drove a lot of their behaviors. And what he's saying now is that this pandemic may well rewire some of our patterns. And it may well be that we become the crazy parents or grandparents that, wash our fruit and vegetables with soap and are perpetually using hand sanitizer and kind of stay at a distance from strangers. But it could also there could be positive impacts around this, in that there's this kind of embrace the moment, embrace today, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. And let's live live to the max right now. And so there's different ways that this could manifest itself, but I find it fascinating to contemplate the longer term implications and the potential for it to be, it could, for millennials and for Gen Z, it could be very formative, even though as a generation right now, they're seen as not really being as threatened by the virus as an older generation, but they're being in and around it and seeing the way that consumer patterns and the economics have changed. And it's at a very formative time period for them. And so this might be interesting to sort of watch longer term. But I think this whole, the fear may remain long term. I think there could well be something in that one. So those are our 13 trends. And rather than dwelling on the negative, I think it's important to try to consider, knowing that, what are the opportunities? If we plan for that, how do we adjust our business going forward? How do we consider that is the mindset, the consumer behavior of our customers, and how can we change our product or our service, how we offer it, how we promote it, how we price it, all of these things, where we promote it and price it, all of these things start to matter. So that's our 13 trends for this week. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you back for the next 5-minute marketing tips when we publish the next post.